introduce our next speaker, Rose Harris. Rose is actually Victoria's Rural Ambassador. I didn't even know about the existence of Rural Ambassadors until recently. And while it was only officially awarded to Rose back in 2011, she tells us she's been actually a Rural Ambassador for many, many years as a lover of the lifestyle and the agricultural industry. Interestingly, and it's interesting, we raised the issue of resilience and resilience in communities, and resilience is one of those words that's taken on lots of different meanings, but of course we think back to its original idea about how well can you respond to shocks, how well does a system bounce back, and how well do communities bounce back. For many years, Rose now has been talking to and writing newspaper columns on what creates community, what are these sort of cultures of community leadership, and what does a resilient community look like. So to tell us some of those stories and also to talk about what it means to empower rural communities, I'd like you to welcome Rose Harris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. When I came to thinking about my bold idea, I thought about my Rural Ambassador journey that Ross just spoke about. And then I thought maybe I could tell you about how I've just driven from Donald to Darwin to look at all the rural communities and the agriculture in between and what makes communities tick. I sat down to really think about it, and I thought, when it comes to it, there's really only one story to tell. It's been 27 years in the making, and it's a story about where I grew up. I grew up in the Wimmera at a little place called Gurrock, halfway between Donald and St. and that's my dad in his barley crop. He's pretty proud of it. He runs 75 acres. And he grows that completely. Oh, it's gone. There he is. He's pretty proud of looking around the other farmers and what he does in his little patch. So I grew up, and my norm was wide open spaces, fresh air, this sort of stuff, brothers on motorbikes, dads on tractors, a pet pig and a pet dog at the same time. I could walk for as far as my legs would take me, only to lie down on the paddock and look up at the sky and the sunshine filtering through a bull oak tree. There was probably a friendly cow or two come up to see what it was all about. And then I'd just get up and walk home. We'd have puddles. I'd jump in puddles even though I knew my gumboots had holes in them, just so I could go and dry my socks on the wood fire. And all this amazing stuff I had at my disposal. And I grew up, I guess, as most youngsters do, I never really appreciated what I had right there on my own back doorstep. And I did appreciate water. I appreciated those puddles, but more than just something to jump in and get my socks wet. I knew what it meant to have a puddle right at the right time for the farmers around me. I knew what it meant when the rain didn't come for a long time. I also knew what it meant when it came too fast, too quickly, and the devastation it could bring, not only to the farmers, but the whole community and the area around it. Because in a bad year, it's not just the guy on the tractor who feels it. It's the people in town, it's the business owners who can't get any trade because the cash just isn't there. It's the school kids, it's the friends of the farmers' kids. The impact is very far reaching. So despite not being a big farmer, I had this inkling that this stuff was pretty important. However, when I turned 17, I finished year 12, and the very next month, I took off. All that I just told you about, I left behind and I went. I wasn't staying there, I was heading out to see the big wide world. And I did that. I started off in Deniliquin, and I did a few years there, and then I got married. My husband and I went to Kalgoorlie for a little while. Then we came back, we did a stint in Ballarat. A couple of kids later, we're in Melbourne, and things were going fantastically. Career-wise, I couldn't have asked for anything more. I was getting written up all over the place. If it had anything to do with writing, I was having a go at it. I was reviewing cars, I was on online journalism, daily newspapers, bi-weekly newspapers, sub-editing. I was having a shot at the whole lot. But something was missing. Despite the fact I felt like I had to be in the city for all this to happen, and I couldn't have really asked for a whole lot more, sitting in a Lamborghini at the motor show. Something was always missing, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. And that's where the Rural Ambassador thing comes in. I realised that that love for a rural area, you just can't shake, despite what's out there. and it all came down to a handful of stones and some tulips. You see, one day when I was in our suburban rented house, I thought I'll teach my son about some horticulture tips. I'm not known to be the best gardener, but my mum had bought us some tulip bulbs and I thought I can't have her coming down and seeing them still on the bench, so we better do something about that. And I remembered when I was a kid and we used to plant things on the farm and in pots and just a stick to see if it'd grow. We'd go down the long gravel driveway and scoop up a handful of stones to put in the bottom of this pot, because that was the key to the irrigation, you see. So off we set, and we couldn't find any stones in our backyard, and we thought, never mind, we'll keep walking, and we walked and we walked and we walked, and there was no stones. And suddenly I thought, hang on a minute, this kid can't grow up without stones. I've got to do something about this. So in between those tulips being bulbs and flowering, to cut the rest of the long story short, we packed up ship and we shifted up back to the Wimmera where I grew up, because it wasn't until that moment when I was trying to educate my own children that I realised how fantastic it was and how much I had there ready and waiting for me to take on. So we shifted back up to the Wimmera, and the norms of peak hour traffic and takeaway shops and shopping centres and indoor swimming lessons and 2-year-old soccer teams, which were all fantastic, turned into finding what's in holes, flying kites till the kids couldn't feel their arms anymore, hiding in grass, growing their own veggie garden in the backyard, having their own chooks, and the whole world just transformed. And why am I telling you all this? Because it's a good story. It's a feel-good story. Did you not all feel good hearing about my story about coming back to the Wimmera? And do you know what? When I came back to the Wimmera, I found out we're not telling enough of them. And I love how it's led in today with the speakers before me, because it's all about, in rural areas, we need to realise that we're doing some fantastic things. We have our challenges, and I don't discount that one bit, and I'm sure we'll go into a lot of those today. But we have some fantastic things happening out here too. My story is just one. There's a lot out there. Since we've come back, my career has gone even further. I'm now working in my dream job, where I get to write fantastic stories about people who think they're pretty ordinary, but they're actually doing extraordinary things. And I put that back into the community. So the community realises stories that have been sitting there the whole time that they didn't realise the value of. We need to celebrate how great we are, and we need to talk more about our victories. It doesn't sit right with us. We're not good at patting ourselves on the back, but we need to talk it up a bit more every opportunity we get. Agriculture and rural communities go hand in hand, as I mentioned before. In a bad year, it's not just a bad year for the guy on the tractor. And the feeling on the street in town when all seems lost and then the rain comes. You can't describe it, you can't put your finger on it. It doesn't matter whether you're working in the supermarket or you're running 20,000 acres. Everybody feels it the same. And that knowledge of agriculture needs to interact with rural communities side by side. So why not take the collaborative approach? Why don't we look at rural communities and a sustainable future for agriculture together? Because regardless of whether you're really involved in agriculture or you are just running a shop in town, everybody feels the same thing. And communities are more than ABS figures. And that's the great stories and the people in them, and the more we tell them, will prove that. And this is where I talk about young people. And I've heard it mentioned a bit this morning because I'm 27. I guess I'm still in that young person's category. And I was an even younger person when I was 17 and when I took off. So what do? How do we keep them? Do you know what? Let them go. Let them go. Let them go and do what I did. Let them go for 8, 10 years, however long it is. And support them, encourage them. We could guilt them into staying, or we could say, you go out there and see what's out there, do what you want to do, get the career you want. But while they're gone, we work on our communities. And we keep telling the good stories, we attract the facilities we need and they'll come to expect, such as childcare centres, healthcare services, and anything else that they'll come to expect outside their rural communities. So when they come, just like I did, to find some rocks to put in their tulip pot, they'll think, hang on, there might be something else out there, and the rural communities will offer them just what they've had outside. And when they come back, learn from them. Find out what they found out while they were out doing their thing. They might have an innovative idea that can be implemented straight into communities, agriculture, that people have been sitting around tables talking about for years. Because they've been out there experiencing a different lifestyle, they can bring that idea straight to the table. And we need to open up the agricultural industry. It's so much more than just sitting on a tractor. Just about every skill could be related to the agricultural industry. You could be working in sustainability, finance, the leading edge technology of GPS systems. I was working in PR and marketing through the agricultural industry. The opportunities are out there, and we need to talk about that a bit more. We need to change the image and show people there's some fantastic opportunities in the agricultural industry. And this is where we need to listen. Because sometimes when the white noise of life dissipates, I hear these people. These are my kids. They're 4 and 6 at the moment. And I hear them and I listen to them and I actually hear what they're saying. And they'll say things like, Mummy, Grandpa's crop's almost as tall as me. How fantastic is that? And then they'll say, check out how pink the sunset is tonight. They'll run through a swarm of locusts and then they'll sit down and go, what's happening there? How does that work? In Donald, we don't have plastic bags, so we'll go somewhere else and they'll go, what are they using plastic bags here for, Mummy? How does that work? They'll look around town and see these big black panels on all the roofs just about. What's that, Mummy? How does that work? That's solar power. I might have to call up a few friends to get some answers, but it's all there. It's all already there. This is their norm now. They go fishing. They dance in the street just because all the neighbours know who they are. The whole community knows their names and they come up and are interested in their lives. They chat about what happened at school. My son just started school this year in a grade of 10 preps. It's just incredible and we need to talk more about these stories. They've got them. Let's harness it, let's encourage it. To sit in a paddock and see a friendly cow come and have a sniff is pretty fantastic stuff. So it's all there naturally. So why not just encourage it? The sustainability and the beauty that children see in the world is quite incredible. My son runs up to me with great ideas. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we grew fruit trees and vegetable gardens and had chooks in our own backyard? We'd never need to go to the supermarket again. Great idea. Why not encourage it? Because somewhere along the line it stops happening. So this is the future we're building for, so let's listen to them. And surely good can only attract more good. By telling good stories, surely we're only going to attract more of the good. When we say, look how fantastic our communities are, and look at all this stuff that's happening over here, surely we'll attract the attention of people who'll say, well, you know what? I'm going to help you out and give you this facility you've been wanting for a long time. Dare to imagine a positive future in rural areas and agriculture. Let's keep talking about what could happen, what is possible, as well as what we need to fix now and what probably isn't going our way. Let's talk about what is possible. We have our challenges, I won't deny that at all, but we're resilient. We're amazingly resilient people and we have the ability to empower ourselves and people around us because we have great stories too and we need to tell more about them. As I said before, a pat on the back doesn't sit comfortably and that's something we need to try and get a bit more used to. I'm not saying you need to make your head too big that it doesn't fit in the drawer of the pub, but we need to celebrate a few of the things that are happening around us and just give it an occasional pat on the back and get it out there. And we need to point out the great things about living in rural areas, just like I said my kids do. Why don't we talk about why we love it? Why do we live where we live? Why is it fantastic? As well as what we need to fix up and what we need to take on in the challenge area, why do we live here and why is it so fantastic? And find out what's important to your community and work towards achieving it. That's all I've got to tell you today. That's my bold idea. It's pretty simple. It's about telling the good stories.
Thank you very much, Rose, for evoking those wonderful thoughts. Of, the picture, the story you told about, the pursuit of experience. The lying in the paddock, the getting your socks wet and drying them in front of the fire, rather than the unsustainable pursuit of stuff. The pursuit of experiences is such an important part. Does anyone have any questions for Rose before I invite the other two speakers that we've already had to come up as well, and then we'll just finish with a couple of minutes of Q&A before we go off to a break?
I'll make a comment.
A comment?
I think it's a country town syndrome that we never recognise the true value of the citizens in our own town. Like, if you're going to get a guest speaker, you've got to get someone from somewhere else that's far better than what you've actually got under your nose, That's part of the problem, isn't it?
That is exactly right. And even when I was come to ask to speak here, I said, I don't think I'm important enough for that. And then I realised what I'm trying to say, and maybe I should walk a bit of it. It's exactly right. And we look for the big stories to tell in our newspapers and our newsletters and that sort of thing, where there's some extraordinary, to live in one area for 90 years is an extraordinary achievement. To sit with a person who's lived in one area for 90 years and hear about the changes they've seen and their observations, and then put it into print for the rest of the community, is quite a learning experience. And we have all those people in our own communities, but we have this thing that we just know we're not allowed to talk about it, or you can't say that I'm good at something because you might have to give a shout at the pub or something like that. But it's a small price to pay.
It's incredible to reflect on the things that we've come to value in people, and all this emphasis that goes on what people have earned or had or made, or the size of their house or their whatever. And I know those of us that have worked in doing similar things and interviewing in rural areas, you find that's real substance in people. That's what we should be valuing, and why don't we value those things? And glad someone's bringing those up.
People are very interested in it too, and it's surprising. A lot of people will say, young people don't want to hear about that, but they do. They're very interested in it, and they do want to hear about it, so we need to talk about it more.
Two questions. We've got one up the back, and then you, sir.
Well, mine's only going on from that before. It's just another comment, really, because you said before when we talked about resilience, you said about the ability to bounce back. What I was talking about resilience was more, if you can imagine a system in a basin, and there's a whole lot of basins around, it's about that system moving from one basin to another and in an altered state so that it doesn't provide the same services to that other basin. So it's about building the walls up, increasing the size of the basin. It's about what resilience is about from my way of thinking. And what Rose was talking about was doing exactly that with one of the systems there with people, about going back to what Ian Kernan said, changing our cultural thinking from where we are masters of the environment to where we become part of it and exist within it. And the same thing, those children of yours are going to have that education and the knowledge that they're going to be part of an environment. They're not there to master it. And I hope that's what happens anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And I haven't really pinpointed where we lose that. Yeah. Somehow we become in the pursuit of getting the bigger and the better, and yet it does sound a bit ridiculous when you say to people, if you actually sit down and listen to your 6-year-old, they come up with some amazing things. And to grow up in a town that's already quite sort of forging ahead with sustainability, if you ever see solar panels and no plastic bags, makes them ask questions and learn life lessons from it. So it's definitely something that I think we need to harness, because after all, they're the people who are going to be growing up in this town, and we would hope to retain.
So the systems that they're impacting upon, they're not going to be pushing them out of that basin, and I guess that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, great, thanks.
I just wanted to ask Rose, she didn't say that she works for the Bull Times and Donald. I've got to get that out of and she's also got a very special son called Leo. That's because he's special. But Rose, on your journey, you didn't go into the journey too much up to Darwin. And is there something you could bring back to us all down here that you picked up stopping in those small towns and talking to all the people that you were able to get stories from?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I could have spoken a lot. Just very quickly, the Rural Ambassador Award, I won the Victorian Award, and that afforded me the opportunity to go to the national final in Darwin. And instead of driving, I used the prize money, instead of flying, I used the prize money to drive. And I took my kids and my husband, and we took a camper van and stopped in rural communities to talk to people about this type of stuff. And the lesson, I guess, comes out of it is this talk. It's telling the positive stories. Very quickly, an example is I deliberately, we stayed the night in Snowtown in South Australia, just because we wanted to. And I thought there's a community that would be forgiven to throwing its hands up and saying, we've had enough, we're leaving, we're going to Adelaide. We pulled up in the camper van at the caravan park, and it was dark, and this older guy come and knocked on the door and said, oh, that's $10 to stay tonight. And we gave him 20. We thought that was a bit cheap, hot showers, toilets and all the rest of it. I said to him, what is there to see in Snowtown? He said, wow, we've just raised enough money for our second community bus. We've almost built the skate park, and we're irrigating the oval, and the money you're giving me from this caravan park is actually helping us upgrade our facilities at the football ground. I thought, wow, what a great community champion. And it's about having those ambassadors and community champions and telling the good stories. He could have easily said what we're all thinking and said, oh, you don't want to bus loads of people who still come through to look at things. But he didn't. He told me the fantastic stories. I found out where he lived the next day and went and had a cup of tea to hear more, because I was so excited. He'd lived in Snowtown his whole life, but he was telling the fantastic stories. And I think it's changing that attitude. A lot of people, when I said I was driving from Donald to Darwin, a lot of people said, oh, it's not a lot between there. It's amazing. We went from orchards to vineyards to mango farms growing out of red dirt, which just defies what we see as agriculture and possibility, and there's communities around them. So it's all about empowering those communities to sustain the agriculture around it, and also telling the great stories. It all comes back to that.
Donald to Darwin sounds like a journey we all need to be doing.
Can I make a quick observation?
Please, actually, I'm going to quickly invite you both up to
But just a quick observation for Kate and the Bull Oak paper, that I worked in Darwin with Kate's father and with Grothlets. I was in the water industry, and of course Kate's father was the chief veterinarian, and so we go back. We don't really go back a long way, but it's really interesting to see those sorts of links.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a question for each of them before we wrap up. Ian Kiernan, in his opening address, talked about where's the incentive to change. Where does that come from? And Rose, you talked about creating incentives to bring young people back to communities. That's a wonderful idea, rather than trying to sort of keep them here. Christine talked about the incentive to value ecosystems, and Kate talked about the incentive to understand the broader ideas around what we mean by environment by reporting on all those things. So I guess I wanted to ask each of you just to very quickly respond to Ian's challenge to us all, and so where do you think, what should we be doing? This is about change, this is about new futures. What do you think we should be doing as the kind of to create that incentive for us to change as a wider society? Start with you, Kate.
When we went round Victoria last year, we came back with a report, and we've called it Many Publics. So that's the first thing. The incentive to change is about broadness, about bringing everybody in. Everybody who came along was part of participation, being in it, being surrounded by others, bringing others along. Nobody wants to change things if it's all dreary and doom and gloom. Most people just throw their hands up and think, right, that's the end of the world. Participation meant that people could in fact share things, they could collaborate, they could bounce off other enthusiasts. I mean, I smiled as you were talking. I heard you talk about Kalgoorlie, and I've been there as well. If ever there was a place that says it's can do, it's Kalgoorlie, for all sorts of complex reasons. But about that stuff about participation, and then if you're thinking participation, what we found is people who talked about what they were doing that was inventive or intellectual or thoughtful or purposeful, all of that plays into it. My view is, and it's something I get from my mad old dad, surround yourself with bright young people and bring them in. And that's, I think, what people need to be thinking about. It picks up on every message that you're going to hear today.
Speaking of bright young people, Rose, incentives to change, where might that come from?
Well, it's a great leader. I guess I could just build on Kate's comment as I guess being one of those people who left for bigger things and there was nothing there, because that was just the mindset we all had. And then coming back is when you do attract those young people back, it's about valuing them. It's like what I spoke about in my talk, with not just say, oh, okay, yes, well done, you've come back, and why did you stay away for so long, and don't you see how all the shops have closed because you young people don't stay here. It's about saying, where have you been, what have you learnt, and then integrating that into the community. That's how I've felt coming back to the Wimmera. people in the Donald community were very quick to figure out where I could fit in as a valued member of society, and it's led on to an amazing lifestyle for me where I couldn't even change one iota and a dream job. But I felt valued, so even if I was actually going to make some mistakes, which they allowed me to do, I felt valued enough to have another go. And there was a lot of more established people in the community who were willing to even step back and support me as I had a go, and they even were willing for me to make mistakes, but they were there to catch me, and they wanted to learn from me just as much as I wanted to learn from them. So it's coming halfway with that sort of mentality I guess we get sometimes in small towns.
Terrific, thanks. And Christine, the incentive to change, where's it coming from?
Well, I think go back to valuing ecosystem services, because that's how I see that we keep. I totally agree with you. That young people should let them go and encourage, provide something for them to come back to. But I see that if we valued our ecosystem services produced on some of our marginal land, we would have jobs for people. They could be jobs anywhere from high-tech jobs to actually, if anyone's tried to register for the Carbon Farming Initiative and get on the website and map out their land, you need high-tech people in your local community, let me tell you. But they also provide jobs that are getting less and less of in local communities for people who aren't doing those high-tech jobs, and so that's where I think that that's my passion. I think I can see these people being gainfully employed and part of the environment in their local community.
Thank you. Would you please join me in welcome and thank you. Don't wander off. We'd also like to take a little present from obviously Mount Zero, one of the great local pieces of produce.
Wow.
And thank you very much for your presentations. I remind everybody that straight after the break, we're going to come back here at 11 o'clock and hear from Professor Tim Flannery from Bathurst. So that will be an exciting session. That'll be sharp at 11 o'clock. So if we could all be in and seated by 9:59 and a half, that would be really, really good. Now, please have some morning tea, and thank you.